Actually, no, I don't trust machines.
They told me my vote was counted, but I'm really not sure it was.
We did a top-to-bottom review of the voting machines that we use here in Ohio. This is a vulnerability that we need to protect ourselves against.
The thing is, dead people don't detox. We've got to keep them alive long enough for them to make the decision to get out.
And you think it works?
You're damn right it does.
We will not ever use trailers again. We saw they do not work well, particularly in large group sites when you put families in them. That is not a good housing alternative for us.
We'll bring you the news tonight on Dan Rather Reports.
Good evening. Tonight we return to a question that strikes at the very heart of our democracy. How do we as a nation vote? On this broadcast, we've conducted in-depth investigations into the security and reliability of electronic touchscreen voting machines. In the wake of the disputed 2000 presidential election and Florida's hanging chads, states across the country rushed out and spent billions of federal tax dollars trying to solve once and for all the voting problem. Many states bought the touchscreen machines, and now many state officials are having buyer's remorse over these machines, and the taxpayers are once again footing the bill. For this report tonight, we come to you from the Franklin County Courthouse in Columbus, Ohio, the site of yet another chapter in this saga over how we vote.
We would never settle for this kind of substandard engineering in our banking or our communication. There'd be lawsuits, there'd be outcry. So why is it when it's the voters who are the ones at risk that they get the short shrift and we should just be required to accept it?
Ohio Secretary of State Jennifer Brunner has a very big mess to clean up and not a lot of time to do it. Brunner, a Democrat, took office in 2007 and now is overseeing a critical election season. Few thought Ohio would play such a large role in the primaries, but its March 4th contest now makes it one of a few remaining states that could decide the Democratic nominee and ultimately who sits in the Oval Office. Ohio also is a state that has been plagued with Election Day problems. In 2004, there were long lines at the polls, allegations of vote fraud, and the state's touchscreen machines have routinely malfunctioned. In a survey last year, Ohio voters, like a growing number of voters and public officials across the country, said they had serious doubts about touchscreen voting machines. And so did Secretary of State Brunner.
We did a top-to-bottom review of the voting machines that we use and the systems we use here in Ohio.
In September, she commissioned nearly $2 million in tests of the state's electronic voting machines. The results, published in the so-called Everest report, were disturbing. The study found insufficient security, lack of accountability, and flawed software.
So essentially, we have over $100 million worth of voting machines that we bought in Ohio, and these are where we found some of the greatest cause for concern.
The study, conducted by an independent lab in Denver and researchers from 4 universities conducting parallel tests, found the machines vulnerable to tampering and potentially crippling technical glitches.
Essentially, with some of the models, depending on which you're talking about, one, the memory cards that actually hold the data for people's votes, there's no buffer on those, so that essentially, if the memory card is full, the information at the beginning is erased and you don't get any kind of notification that you're losing data on the cards.
Just weeks before the March 4th primary, Brunner ordered all Ohio counties using the electronic voting machines to also offer paper ballots, ballots that will be counted using optical scan machines like this.
We don't want to create confusion, we don't want to create chaos, so we're listening to everyone, and if our goal is to improve voter confidence, if we can reach some kind of resolution in a bipartisan fashion, we will improve voter confidence because it wasn't one party pulling something over on another.
But Brunner has a more ambitious agenda. Replace all of the state's electronic touchscreen voting machines with what she says are the more reliable optical scan machines in time for November's general election. Back in August, we reported our own investigation of the Ivotronic machines made by Election Systems and Software, ES&S, and we found performance problems. The Everest study also found the Ivotronic machines could, in theory, be rigged by computer-savvy voters using anything from magnets to handheld computer devices. One key danger, infecting the machines and the votes they store with computer viruses.
Now, has any of this happened? We like to believe not. We think not. We think we've had good elections up to this point. But living in the world that we're in today and knowing how we never expected we would be prone to attacks from outside sources, this is a vulnerability that we need to protect ourselves against.
Fair to say that you became concerned about the reliability of the machines and the security of the machines.
Correct. There are performance issues with the machines as well. I mean, simple things like the legs fall off of these machines. And our lab out of Colorado, who did the testing and looked at the performance issues, said very simply, over time, the performance of these machines will deteriorate.
But Bruner thinks optical scan machines are more reliable. This is where voters fill out paper ballots similar to students' SAT forms and feed them into machines that count the votes. In the case of a recount, the paper ballots can be compared to the computer's tally.
It's a system we can rely on for a longer period of time until the manufacturers can improve the computer voting systems to the point that they meet the standards of other applications that we use every day.
Now, you've run into some resistance.
A little.
Well, as best you can, as objectively as you can, what's the beef?
Essentially, some people look at it from the pure money standpoint. They say, look, we've spent all this money on this equipment and we're just going to junk it. Other people say, well, you can't show that this has actually happened, so just knowing that it could happen, well, there ought to be things that we could do to protect this. But our researchers said this is so systemic with these voting systems that you would have to re-engineer the software to really make it right.
Not everyone agrees with the Secretary of State's conclusions.
The Secretary simply lacks the authority to direct the county to use a particular system in the election.
This hearing in a courtroom in Columbus is just one of many skirmishes being fought across the country over whether it's better to use already purchased touch-screen machines or institute some form of paper ballot. Prosecutor David Phillips, a Republican of nearby Union County, challenged Bruner's order in court. He says the electronic machines work fine and that any new system is just a waste of money.
There is no system made that is 100% foolproof, but our experience in Union County has been that the Ivotronic has worked for us, and we have over $500,000 invested in that system. We'd like to keep it.
As far as you're concerned, the machines have worked well in the county. You don't have any problems with them.
That's correct.
And therefore, you don't see a necessity of having the option of a paper ballot at the precinct. You can do it in absentee ballot.
That's right. And we think that that will create confusion, at least for a difficulty with our poll workers, confusion for the voters, and we don't. We foresee it as essentially producing a more chaotic situation at the polls.
As we traveled across the country, we heard from many voters who had a hard time trusting electronic voting machines.
A lot of the machines could be easily tampered with, so just have to hope and pray that they work.
They told me my vote was counted, but I'm really not sure it was.
There is no way for citizens, election judges, or poll watchers to verify how the machines actually count their votes, and how can anyone trust something they can't see or verify?
New Mexico and Florida have decided to abandon the touchscreen technology in advance of the November general election. And they, too, are experiencing some resistance as they try to prepare for the November vote. California is getting rid of much of its touchscreen voting, and the state is still counting the votes from its Super Tuesday primary. And legislators in Colorado are still debating whether to recertify their touchscreen machines or switch to paper ballots. At a recent hearing, lawmakers acknowledged the absurdity of it all.
I think when this is all said and done, if the legislature does its job, and I only have one vote like everybody else, but what we'll be doing is distributing unhappiness in an equitable way. So that's my goal when we do this.
Now, what is your immediate goal for the March 4th primary elections here?
My goal for the March 4th primary is a very smooth election. So, as any election administrators would be, 4 counties out of the 57 counties using the touchscreen machines have already gone to paper ballots for the March primary. One I nudged a little bit, which was Cuyahoga County, the largest county in the state. They had a tie vote, and I broke that tie vote in favor of the paper ballots. But what we're doing is actually requiring that counties with the electronic voting machines have backup paper ballots.
Brunner did a little more than nudge Cuyahoga County last year. Home to Cleveland, the county saw major election problems in 2004. Brunner fired the entire election board and named a new director, Jane Platten, who overhauled the county's voting procedures. Still, the touchscreen machines acted up. So Ohio's most populous county is replacing them with optical scan machines in time for the March 4th primary.
I do feel confident in this system. The Secretary of State made the recommendation for us to move to this system, and I think that a paper-based system for a voter, for a poll worker, for our staff is a much less burdensome system to execute. So we've been going full speed since December 21st to make the transition to a totally different voting system in Cuyahoga County as a result.
Well, what you've described is good intentions have gone awry. After the 2000 election, with all the punch card business saying, listen, we need to move out of basically a mechanical system, the punch card system, to the 21st century computerized electronic world. But the machines turned out to be, not just on your test, but those of others, unreliable and with some real security issues. Fair?
If I'm a voting machine manufacturer, I say, well, when you sell to the government, you sell at a low margin, but you sell at such a volume that you can make some money. So everyone rushed to try to get this done, to try to compete, to try to get this county or that county to buy their system, and not enough thought was put into the long term on how do we ensure they're secure, how do we implement this, how do we make sure the training's done right, how do we make sure we've covered the costs, and we've got kind of a mess on our hands around the country, really.
Mess or not, there's an election just weeks away. Ohioans know that as a crucial swing state with a history of tight races, the nation will be watching. Franklin County, home to the state capital, Columbus, has taken a new approach, encouraging voters to cast ballots early to avoid Election Day chaos.
Some years we haven't voted because there wasn't time.
But this year we can all vote early, by mail or in person at the Board of Elections. No excuse necessary.
And there are signs the campaign for an early vote is working. Officials say more than 100,000 of an estimated 750,000 registered voters in the county have already cast ballots by mail. And those ballots are sorted here at the Board of Election headquarters. But the majority of voters will still cast their votes on the day of the election. Dennis White is the Deputy Director of Franklin County's Board of Elections.
And you have quality control right the way through.
Yeah, you know, we're comfortable with it. Can it be improved? Anything can be improved. And, you know, we learn every election that we can, you know, do things differently to make things better for the voter.
Any idea what this machine costs?
And they were right around, I think, right about $4,000. I think Franklin County spent a little over $12 million of federal money, state money, local money to make this conversion from the older version electronic we had to this.
White showed us how the Ivotronic touchscreen machine works.
I do this with my finger in the black?
Yep.
All right, let's see. I want to vote right here. Well, American-made Ford.
Oh, good for you. And if you check here in your verifiable paper trail.
And this is where the paper trail is.
Right, and that's what we use to audit the election. At the end
So
of
I
the
look
election.
down here and I verify my vote in here.
Yeah, did it say?
Yeah, no, it's fine.
White says that many voters like the ease and convenience of the touchscreen machines.
Many people request a paper ballot?
We've had a little over 100 people come through here since last Friday to vote early here at this first polling location we've opened up. And now of, I think of 116, we've had 2 people request a paper ballot.
Do you personally have confidence in the machine?
I tell you what, Dan, I have confidence in any system that we use. The confidence I have in the people that I work with, I have professionals here that take this job seriously, that want to make sure that we run fair and honest elections here and we can do our job without any problems. So
you have quality control, right?
Yeah, you know, and I think that's in anything. I mean, I believe in people, you know, and there's good people everywhere and there's bad people everywhere. You know, can a system be breached? Yeah, okay. But I think that your security is in the people and the procedures and the regulations that lawmakers make and the Secretary of State addresses and directives to secure those possible security breaches.
Well, how do you feel about this responsibility? I mean, as a citizen, you've been around politics for a long while.
Yes.
How do you feel about the responsibility?
I think we all have a huge responsibility to make sure that people that want to cast their vote feel secure, that their vote is, you know, being cast properly, and there's a level playing field, and their vote's going to be recorded. I think we all have a responsibility in that.
Who's responsible for the problems that you have?
I think it's a combination of the Help America Vote Act, inexperience in understanding what it would take nationally to implement this computer-based type of voting systems, and again, it's the manufacturers having to respond to an inadequate system that was developed by Congress to provide voting machines on a widespread basis for the public. This is not a good situation for not just Ohio, but for the rest of the country, but we will make it work, and we'll have an election. We always do.
Ohio is a pivotal swing state with a history of close elections, and so the state's voting machines deserve special attention. But the skirmishes playing out here are only part of a much larger national debate over the integrity, security, and fairness of our voting systems. Now, when we return, we travel to the Canadian city of Vancouver, host of the 2010 Winter Olympic Games. It will welcome the world with a sparkling reputation, but few tourists will see the city's darker shadows. We'll show them to you, so stay here with us. The city of Vancouver boasts that it's one of the richest cities in North America. Downtown is studded with cranes building multi-million-dollar condos. Vancouver is the site of the upcoming Winter Olympics and is repeatedly voted most livable city in the world. But visit this part of town, the Dickensian underside of the city, the so-called Downtown Eastside, and it's a different story. This is the single poorest neighborhood in Canada, one of the roughest areas in all of North America. 1 in 3 residents here is HIV positive. The rate of hepatitis C is 70%, putting Vancouver on par with Botswana when it comes to infection rates. Tourists who take a wrong turn off the cobblestone downtown streets are likely to find used syringes laying on the sidewalks, streets lined with homeless people, prostitutes making their rounds, and junkies shooting up in broad daylight. So Vancouver has enacted a controversial scheme. An experiment is going on in the Downtown Eastside, an experiment in which drug addicts are not only allowed but encouraged to shoot up in the safety of a government-sponsored clinic. It's part of a broad plan called harm reduction, reducing the harm caused by the likes of prostitution and drug abuse by bringing these illicit activities into the system. The idea is to stop the spread of disease, to stall the urban AIDS crisis here, and to show that drug addiction is a disease that needs to be treated medically, not criminalized. Will the plan work? That's what we came here to find out. Now, where are we here? This is Hastings,
right here.
and
this is Hastings in Columbia, and probably this corner here is really quite the corner.
Dean Wilson is an addict who has been living in the Downtown Eastside for more than 20 years. He says the evidence of desperate conditions is all over this neighborhood.
This is a rig that's been thrown away by somebody. I can't walk away and just leave that there, so I picked them up very carefully.
There are 7,000 addicts, many of them homeless, in this 10-block area alone.
That is everything I own in the world right now. It's right in that pile.
These alleys have taken their toll. There's literally thousands of people have died of overdose. I bet you there's a couple hundred who died in this alley alone.
This is a sight rarely seen so out in the open on the streets of most major cities in North America. But here in Vancouver's downtown Eastside, this takes place literally hundreds of times a day.
No.
It's gotten so bad down here, Vancouver's urban crisis has come to the attention of the United Nations.
Vancouver is considered the world's most livable city, but my question is, for whom?
Patricia Lytle was among the authors of a recent UN Population Fund report which warned that high urbanization levels in fast-growing cities as varied as wealthy Vancouver and the AIDS-ravaged African nation of Botswana can lead to extremely high HIV prevalence.
You said that this particular area reminded you of Botswana. Comparing with Botswana raised a lot of people's eyebrows, to say the least.
The Downtown Eastside has an HIV rate that is the same as Botswana's.
Is that true?
Yes. It's got the most concentrated epidemic in the Western Hemisphere of HIV, and possibly in the industrialized world.
How did it get this way? Vancouver, about 150 miles north of Seattle, is a port city, an entry point for drugs. It's also the only major Canadian city that has a mild winter, so it attracts homeless addicts from around the country, many of whom share needles and other drug paraphernalia, passing on viruses like HIV and hepatitis.
Tell me why, if you think they should, anyone living in Dubuque or Des Moines or Dallas should care about what's happening in downtown Eastside, Vancouver.
This could happen in any city in the world. I think what's interesting about Vancouver is that it is such a wealthy city and such a wealthy country. If we can't deal with this problem, then who can?
The way Vancouver has chosen to deal with the problem is not through the traditional means of tougher law enforcement, but by actually allowing IV drug users to shoot up in the comfort and safety of this government-sponsored clinic.
Prior to this being open, no matter where you looked on this block, there was open injection everywhere. Yeah, I mean, literally, the bus stops, everywhere.
Well, let's go inside and have a look around.
Welcome to Insight, Dan.
Insight, the supervised injection site, is the only place of its kind in North America. In these 12 booths, addicts are provided with everything they need to inject heroin or cocaine in a safe manner.
So you get a fresh needle.
Without sharing needles.
Fresh water.
Fresh water.
And spreading viruses.
All right, well, show me what happens here.
Okay, well, typically I'd have my drugs and I would tie myself up. You would find your vein, bango.
Nurses can watch the whole process in the mirrors to make sure it's done safely.
And it's all over.
700 IV drug users come through this facility every day.
Something like this is helping my life, because without this, I'd be in the alley shooting behind some dumpster. And being criminalized, this isn't social drug use. Nobody wants to be here, Dan. This, as you've seen out in the streets, to say this is not a party. It's just horrible.
You're saying it's not a party.
It's not a party. This isn't like on a Friday night having a couple of beers and smoking a joint.
Practical question. From where do the drugs come? Do you buy them on the street? Are they supplied here?
No, we buy them on the street. We still have to go through that black market.
Let me bounce some things by you. The people watching and listening to this, that I strongly suspect at least some of them will have these questions. Why is one not to think that this is, quote, coddling?
The thing is, dead people don't detox. We've got to keep them alive long enough for them to make the decision to get out. And this will keep them alive long enough to get that strategy in place.
And you think it works?
Damn right it does.
The evidence, proponents of Insight say, is upstairs.
What's here?
Well, this is our detox. People from Insight just present.
Down below.
Down below. If they're ready for a break or want to look at detoxing, they just ask. If we've got a space available, we'll be able to let them up on the same day.
Sarah Evans, the coordinator of Insight, says anyone using the safe injection site can ask for a bed in the co-ed detox upstairs and can stay there up to 1 month.
Okay, yeah, this is Sonia.
Thank you so much for helping us this morning.
Hi, I'm Jackie.
Hello. Tell me what brought you here.
I used to use downstairs at Insight, and I got to the point where I didn't want to live anymore. I really didn't, and I do. Deep down inside, I want to live. I want a life.
Now tell me your story. What brought you to that point that you said, listen, I need help and I'm going to get it?
Just sick of like being on the street and like hurting my family and like hurting myself. Like this, it's crazy. It's nuts.
Gotta be dangerous on the street.
It's very dangerous.
Well, you're 47. This young lady is in her early 20s. You talk much together?
Oh yeah, we spend time together.
What do you tell her?
We talk about recovery, you know, and if we need a hug, we give hugs to each other, and they're free.
Well, I would think living in a tough neighborhood, living the life you've lived, that you might be past the hug stage. What you're telling me is you never get past the hug stage.
No, I still love to give hugs.
Well, let's have a hug then. Huh?
Not a problem.
Right, not a problem. That's me too.
Supporters of Insight say this is the ultimate harm reduction, getting addicts to this stage of recovery. But for doctors like Julio Montaner, one of the world's leading AIDS researchers, it started with a simple dilemma, an AIDS crisis out of control in Vancouver's Downtown Eastside.
I think it's important to understand why an HIV researcher all of a sudden has developed an interest on this particular subject matter. Imagine that in the year 2003, 50% of the people that died with HIV in this city had never accessed treatment for HIV, which, by the way, in Canada is free. So we needed to do something to begin to access these difficult populations.
And the Insight was a result of this.
Exactly.
The idea came from similar safe injection sites in Germany, which led to a decline in heroin deaths there.
It's not time for inaction, it's time for action.
Dean and other drug users lobbied City Hall for the right to start a similar center in Vancouver. The Liberal Canadian government at the time in Ottawa eventually agreed to try the experiment and offered Vancouver an exemption to the country's drug laws. And the experiment at least seems to be working. 24 peer-reviewed articles have been written about the effectiveness of the facility to reduce syringe sharing among HIV-positive addicts, stop overdose fatalities, and increase the rate of detox by 30%. Inspired by this apparent success in Canada, the city of San Francisco has begun discussing opening a safe injection site of their own, and this past October invited folks from Insight down to share what they've learned.
There's no sharing of drugs permitted on the premises, no dealing, and there's also self-injection only.
Thank you so much.
For someone who comes to me after this broadcast says, well, if San Francisco wants to get, quote, soft on drugs, they'll pay a heavy price for that. You can't afford to be soft on drugs. You would say what to that person?
This is not about being soft on drugs. This is about being practical, dealing with a public health epidemic in our midst and, in fact, on global terms, and trying to find solutions to real problems that can be applied here and today. And let me just say very clearly that I'm a father of 4 children, ages 17 to 21, and I don't promote drug use, I don't like drug use, I don't encourage drug use, and I want to stop drug use. But the way to stop it is not to forbid them, is to educate people and to work with those that are addicted so that they can move on to a better standard of living.
Not everyone agrees with that sentiment. Back when Insight opened in 2003, the American drug czar, John Walters, called it, quote, state-sponsored suicide. And even some of the frontline officers who walk the beat in the Downtown Eastside have their doubts about the clinic. Constable Shane Atkin has been working this part of town for more than a decade, and he says he hasn't seen much progress since Insight opened.
I've seen no change in the number of people who inject drugs in public, and the proof is here. And it's here every day. And the ironic part of it is the fact that the supervised injection site is just on the other side of this building.
But at this point, Insight is just a pilot project and only serves a fraction of the thousands of addicts here. The rest are still on the streets.
Why can't you do this in the privacy of your own home? Think we'd be busting your ass?
You know, the traditional war on drugs approach, the traditional just tell them to clean up their act and make them get better, obviously hasn't worked.
Please rise for the mayor.
Vancouver Mayor Sam Sullivan, the first quadriplegic mayor of a major North American city, is a staunch supporter of the harm reduction approach to the drug problem. It's a philosophy that was endorsed by the Liberal federal government in Ottawa when Insight opened in 2003, but the new Conservative administration of Prime Minister Stephen Harper has denounced Insight for promoting the illegal drug trade and has threatened to shut it down.
Because if you remain a drug addict, I don't care how much harm we reduce, you are going to have a short and miserable life.
Your own Prime Minister, Stephen Harper, has said that Insight enables drug addicts. It encourages drug use.
Nobody wants to be a drug addict. I have talked to many people with drug addictions, and they all want to be healthy. They all want to be clean. I tell you, I do not want to be a quadriplegic. I would do anything to stand up. But that's not going to happen. That's not my life. So I need help managing my disability, just like those people with drug addictions need help managing their disability.
For now, the federal government in Ottawa has granted Insight a stay until July, but they refuse to speak with us about their official stance on the project. But in the meantime, Mayor Sullivan has plans to take Insight's harm reduction approach one step further with a radical new project called CAST, in which addicts would actually be supplied with legal pill forms of narcotics from pharmacies, not drug dealers.
We want to convert people who are illegal injection drug users to legal pill medicine users. We want to get them out of shoveling money into the pockets of criminals.
How is it supposed to work?
Well, we know that for heroin, for instance, if you can give them either heroin or an alternative, morphine, Dilaudid, OxyContin, these kinds of options, heroin does not damage organs. It doesn't damage their brain or their liver.
Is this a scientific fact?
Very much so. People can have low-dose opiates and live full, productive lives. They get jobs, they are contributing citizens.
I want to ask you about that. Mayor Sullivan is now pushing this CAST program, C-A-S-T.
It's great.
You think that'll work?
It's got to work. That's what I'm saying. Like, prescribe, please prescribe. Let me go to a pharmacy. Let me get my drugs. Let me go home. Let me live my life. And if I didn't have to spend my whole day, first of all, getting the money to get the drugs, then finding the right guy to get the drugs, then going home, geez, I might have time to go get a job.
Dean says that after 4 decades of being addicted to heroin, he's now in recovery on methadone, and credits Insight for him being alive today. But if Insight shuts down, he's not sure where he and addicts like him would be a year from now.
This is gold standard medicine. This works. And if they close us down, then my life is at stake.
Vancouver's drug-infested downtown Eastside may be the most dangerous for the hundreds of prostitutes who congregate in this part of town. Up next, how Vancouver is trying to apply harm reduction strategies to the oldest profession in the world. Vancouver is a city of contrasts. A landscape studded with snow-capped mountains and multi-million-dollar condos, cradling a downtown that's home to one of the worst urban blights in North America. So Vancouver has its work cut out in the next 2 years as it prepares to host the world at the 2010 Winter Olympics, and the clock is running. But unlike host cities of the past, which have swept their derelict residents to the edge of town, away from the limelight, Vancouver now is trying to address its urban ills with a different cure, what they call a harm reduction approach that allows addicts and prostitutes to take control of their own problems. That's exactly what longtime sex worker Susan Davis decided to do after seeing so many of her friends and colleagues hurt and even killed on the job. Talk to me about the reality on the street.
On the street, it's a very dangerous environment because the traditional picture of the girl leaning in the window of the car, that's illegal. So unfortunately, it means you have to jump in the car without really doing an environmental scan. Does he have a gun? You know, does he appear to be agitated? And that's why they end up dying and suffer so much violence all the time.
That danger became ever more apparent in December,
when the jury convicted Robert William Picton of 6 counts of murder.
when a serial killer was convicted of killing at least 6 prostitutes and has admitted to preying on dozens more.
It's been more than 20 years since activists in the Downtown Eastside first sounded the alarm, and some say the conditions for women in the area have changed little.
There are still women going missing in the Downtown Eastside, and so we can't forget them as well.
There are 67 women missing in this community. And
67?
Yeah.
So Susan has come up with a so-called harm reduction approach to the sex trade in Vancouver. A cooperative of women who would own and manage a secure indoor facility where they could bring clients.
Well, tell me how the co-op works. What is it and how does it work?
Basically what the co-op is, it's a consortium of sex workers that have come together to try and change the conditions, the working conditions here in Vancouver.
And how do you go about trying to do that?
We're trying to get a safe sex work site where women can come and work and be in safe conditions.
Harm reduction?
Harm reduction, yeah, we're big on harm reduction.
But you always say, in fact, all of you refer to it as sex workers.
Yeah.
The world refers to it in other terms.
Yes,
some
they
of them
do.
gentle and some not so gentle.
Yeah.
Yes, they do.
But you prefer the phrase sex workers.
Yeah, we're trying to unify behind that word. What it does is it does promote us as workers, and it begins to sort of change people's minds about how they view our work.
And this is where they hope to do their work someday. A now defunct nightclub and hotel that Susan is lobbying to get from the city.
This is our dream home, that's for sure.
Susan and the other workers have asked the city to donate this building as a harm reduction experiment for the sex trade.
Hopefully it'll be open. The workers, they'd like to have a couple of VIP rooms, so really nice rooms. One which would be themed for fetishes, domination, the other one that would just be sort of treating yourself like a king room with a hot tub and those kind of things.
It would essentially be a legal women-run brothel in the heart of Vancouver's downtown.
I could see a public outcry that says, damned if I'm going to legalize, quote, that kind of stuff.
Yeah. Well, there are the people who are all about abolition, but they've had 100 years to prove that abolition will work, and it hasn't worked, and the death rate of sex workers in this country has gone through the roof as a result of their so-called abolition and enforcement tactics.
Mayor, I want to ask you, we've spoken to a woman named Susan Davis. She's working towards what she calls, quote, a safe work site for prostitutes. Do you know about that initiative, and are you supporting that?
Well, we have different types of people in different areas of prostitution. The concern for me is with the survival sex trade, the people who are driven into prostitution because of their drug addiction.
For these safe work sites, are you still open-minded about it?
Don't like to just punt, but it is a federal issue. It's a major issue just dealing with the drug laws that we have. I got to take on one law at a time.
It took an exemption from Canada's drug laws by the previous Liberal government to start the Insight Safe Injection program, and it would take a similar federal amnesty to allow a sex co-op to be set up, something unlikely to be granted by the current Conservative administration in Ottawa.
Is this a practical dream? Is it achievable?
I think so in Vancouver. You know, we're in a really unique city in North America, I would have to say. We've got the safe injection site here. We're very open-minded, and I think that, yes, in this city that this could happen.
This city has indeed supported some creative experiments, but experiments take time. Time Vancouver may just not have, with the Olympic clock quickly counting down to 2010. And the city's under tremendous pressure to clean up its image before the world descends on this otherwise picturesque city.
And in Turin, you hoist the flag 2 years ago. Any panic beginning to set in? Anybody really concerned saying, what can we do about this Downtown Eastside, because we can't have this, let's put this in quotation marks, we can't have this blight here when the Olympics is here. Any of that?
We need to solve this problem, not because we want to make the city look good for visitors, but because this is a problem that we need to solve for ourselves, not for the rest of the world.
I remember in Atlanta, when Atlanta had the Olympics, they rounded up a lot of homeless people and in fact shipped out some of them.
I am very aware that the standard response to social problems is called buses. Very cheap, very efficient, just move them out. I am absolutely committed that that will not be Vancouver's response. Vancouver has chosen a new way of dealing with things, and I hope we'll have something to teach the world.
So, will Vancouver's infamous Downtown Eastside be cleaned up or even really improved before the Winter Olympics 2 short years from now? We can't know the answer to that question yet. Perhaps the 2010 deadline will inspire the political and public will to push forward with these experiments and break the unfortunate tradition of sweeping under the rug urban blight in Olympic host cities. What there's no doubt about is that some new, innovative, even radical things are being tried here. Experiments that are pushing the envelope in a city that prides itself on being a little bit different.
And now, more information on one of our news-breaking investigative reports about the FEMA camper trailers. The so-called toxic trailers provided by the Federal Emergency Management Agency for the hurricane victims of Louisiana and Mississippi are in fact just that, toxic. The Centers for Disease Control has confirmed what residents of the trailers have been telling us for the past year. The campers have high levels of formaldehyde, 5 times the level of an average home, and in some cases, hundreds of times higher.
We're making the recommendation that all of the people in these situations be relocated to safer, permanent housing as quickly as possible, and certainly before the warm summer months arrive, because we want people to be as safe as they can possibly be.
At a recent news conference in New Orleans, Dr. Julie Gerberding, the director of the CDC, said her agency tested 519 trailers to get a snapshot of the air quality inside.
And that snapshot is helping us understand and confirm what we suspected all along, that in some of these situations the formaldehyde levels are high enough where there could be a health hazard to the people who are living there, and certainly emphasizes the importance of what FEMA's already been doing, which is trying to help people relocate into safer, permanent housing.
Dr. Gerberding says the formaldehyde gas is a known carcinogen. Exposure could have serious health consequences, especially for children, the elderly, or those with respiratory disease. Meanwhile, the director of FEMA has been under increasing pressure from Congress to do something. The agency has received more than 7,000 complaints about the air quality in the trailers. Now that the test results are in, FEMA's David Paulison finally wants the residents of the trailers out.
As a result of these preliminary findings, FEMA is going to continue our aggressive action to provide for the safety and well-being of the residents of these travel trailers by finding them alternative housing. Since November, over 15,000 families have moved out of these travel trailers into some other housing. We're not going to wait for the final results, but we're going to work to continue or expand our actions with the residents who need to be relocated.
But the question remains, why did it take FEMA so long, almost 2 years, to ask the CDC to conduct tests on indoor air quality?
I think we have moved very quickly based on what we knew. You know, hindsight is 20/20. We can look back and say, yeah, maybe we should have done something differently. What we know right now, what we found out now with these testing is we're going to move people out of these things, and they've been in them too long. They've been in them 2 years, and we're very cognizant of that.
FEMA has been unusually open about the formaldehyde issue this week, but this has not always been the case. Recently uncovered documents show that despite FEMA's stalling, sophistry, and sometimes silence, the agency has known about the problem for almost 2 years. We first brought you an investigative report on the hurricane victims being exposed to formaldehyde last spring, including a first-hand account of formaldehyde concerns from a former FEMA employee, Jesse John Finneran.
I know when I was working with FEMA, we had people that were complaining about it. We had people that were sick. We had, and they did nothing, and they suppressed me from speaking about it. They tried to suppress everybody else from speaking about it.
These HDNet reports were confirmed by residents who said they complained but received no help from FEMA. So who's to blame for the formaldehyde fumes? Is it FEMA or the manufacturers of the trailer homes, or both? A lot of residents along the coast think it's the companies who built the campers. Over 5,000 Gulf Coast victims have joined a lawsuit against 14 manufacturers of these trailers. We've reported on workers who built the camper homes complaining of respiratory problems, much like Gulf Coast residents. Their throats hurt and their eyes burned. They believe the trailers were rushed to market, not giving the wood and glue inside time to fully cure. Formaldehyde can be a byproduct of the materials used to build the trailers.
We will not ever use trailers again. We may use mobile homes, just like we're doing in Arkansas and California, but we will not use trailers again. They're too small. We saw they do not work well, particularly in large group sites when you put families in them. That is not a good housing alternative for us.
And it wasn't an inexpensive one either. FEMA spent over $800 million on 25,000 new trailers after Hurricane Katrina in 2005. Trailers that in many cases are now confirmed to be hazardous.
We are working with CDC. CDC is doing a study now on taking some of these travel trailers apart to see exactly what the issues are. We didn't order travel trailers with extra formaldehyde.
But for those still living in the trailers, especially children and the elderly, who are more vulnerable to formaldehyde, finding a safe place to live in is now the most pressing concern.
We started this broadcast tonight by giving you a look at how we vote. But when it comes to this presidential election, there is interest far beyond our shores. Who will sit in the Oval Office will likely have a profound effect on the world community. So finally tonight, we leave you with the words of a diverse array of foreign journalists to get their take on the race for the White House.
We talked to them outside of a recent Republican debate, but most of their focus and the interest of their readers and viewers back home lay with the Democratic candidates.
Hillary and Obama, they are more colorful, right? And they have sort of like a comedy or drama going on. So like our newspaper and a lot of Chinese newspapers are more focusing on the Democratic Party's candidates.
The expectation is that the Democrats will win the election, and there are some people who favor Barack Obama for his he's sort of fresh, he talks and brings about the idea of change, and many people also know Hillary Clinton because of the Clinton years. Those were very good years for Latin American-U.S. relations, and thus Hillary is sort of an early favorite.
I think Hillary will do better because she had the experience of her husband and she lived all these procedures. But Obama, with all my respect, and he's young and have a new idea and he wants to succeed. But I don't know, somebody without experience, we take always time, 2, 3, 4 years, that he feel everything and he know everything and start from zero. This, somebody without experience, we pay the price, always. And this is George Bush, without experience, we pay the price in the Middle East.
People from Burkina Faso are excited to see that one African American is running, and their wish is he wins the election. I don't know if you're going to win, but really they have a big interest in it. They have also interest in this election because of the war in Iraq. You could say that Burkina is far from Iraq. No, I think that we are paying the bill of the war. Today, the gas price is more expensive in Burkina Faso than in the US here. So people are mad of this war and they want to see it ending as soon as possible. So they don't want war anymore. If the winner of this election would end the war, I think that they will appreciate it.
At the time that the war got started, Chile had a temporary seat in the United Nations Security Council, and Chile voted against the U.S. intention to invade Iraq. So Chileans are very proud that they opposed the invasion of Iraq. Chileans thought that the way to work with Iraq was through the United Nations. The fact that 4 years later, 4 years into the war, there isn't a solution yet, in essence, sort of reflects Chile's position. So Chile is very concerned, and I think all the countries in the world are very concerned as to what happens in Iraq. Stability is very important, even more so than democracy at this point. It is important that the United States can find a way to help Iraq be stable, and thus the whole region will be stable, and that will have effects on world peace.
We're very interested in the outcome of this election. We have our military personnel in Iraq, in Afghanistan, in Kosovo. So the decision-making process in Washington somehow is felt in Slovenia also. When the election process began, I think that most people supported Hillary Clinton. She was something new. She was a woman, of course. But lately, I think that Barack Obama is probably the favorite candidate. Sometimes people get confused about your very long election campaign. It's been a year now, right? I mean, we have a law that requires election campaign to start 30 days before elections. So so you can imagine it's quite a shock.
In Norway, the Clintons are rock stars in Europe and in Norway as well. And I think especially now, because it's in a historic election, you could have the first African American or the first female, people are paying even more attention, but also the fact that you've had Bush for 8 years, and he's not very popular in Europe, and definitely not popular in Norway. And the other thing also, I would say, you have two parties. We have 7. Maybe more, I'm not sure exactly what we have right now, but we have many, many parties, and you have 2. So I think also when you're talking about uniting the country, which is a big argument in the debates here, that's a little weird to us, because we used to live with the fact that you have many different parties, many different opinions, and we're fine with that, and we're still sort of friendly to each other. But to bring the country together and be united in the way you're talking about here is sort of a little bit different than the focus is normally in a race at home.
Everything about America is something people like to read, from politics and social stories, even like very, very tiny stuff. And about presidential election is certainly something people like to follow. Well, basically not every day, but it's like a drama or like very interesting show. Especially there's a female president candidate and Obama a black. So gender, race, and that's very interesting.
That's our news program for tonight. For HDNet, Dan Rather reporting. Good night.
If you would like to add your name to an email list for information on upcoming programs, or if you would just like to send a question or comment, please email us at viewer@hd.net.
Actually, no, I don't trust machines.
They told me my vote was counted, but I'm really not sure it was.
We did a top-to-bottom review of the voting machines that we use here in Ohio. This is a vulnerability that we need to protect ourselves against.
The thing is, dead people don't detox. We've got to keep them alive long enough for them to make the decision to get out.
And you think it works?
Damn right it does.
We will not ever use trailers again. We saw they do not work well, particularly in large group sites when you put families in them. That is not a good housing alternative for us.
We'll bring you the news tonight on Dan Rather Reports.
Good evening. Tonight we return to a question that strikes at the very heart of our democracy. How do we as a nation vote? On this broadcast, we've conducted in-depth investigations into the security and reliability of electronic touchscreen voting machines. In the wake of the disputed 2000 presidential election and Florida's hanging chads, states across the country rushed out and spent billions of federal tax dollars trying to solve once and for all the voting problem. Many states bought the touchscreen machines, and now many state officials are having buyer's remorse over these machines and the taxpayers'
problems. The Everest study also found the Ivotronic machines could, in theory, be rigged by computer-savvy voters using anything from magnets to handheld computer devices. One key danger: infecting the machines and the votes they store with computer viruses.
Now, has any of this happened? We like to believe not. We think not. We think we've had good elections up to this point. But living in the world that we're in today and knowing how we never expected we would be prone to attacks from outside sources, this is a vulnerability that we need to protect ourselves against.
Fair to say that you became concerned about the reliability of the machines and the security of the machines.
Correct. There are performance issues with the machines as well. I mean, simple things like the legs fall off of these machines, and our lab out of Colorado, who did the testing and looked at the performance issues, said very simply, over time, the performance of these machines will deteriorate.
But Bruner thinks optical scan machines are more reliable. This is where voters fill out paper ballots similar to students' SAT forms and feed them into machines that count the votes. In the case of a recount, the paper ballots can be compared to the computer's tally.
It's a system we can rely on for a longer period of time until the manufacturers can improve the computer voting systems to the point that they meet the standards of other applications that we use every day.
Now, you've run into some resistance.
A little.
Well, as best you can, as objectively as you can, what's the beef?
Essentially, some people look at it from the pure money standpoint. They say, look, we've spent all this money on this equipment and we're just going to junk it. Other people say, well, you can't show that this has actually happened, so just knowing that it could happen, well, there ought to be things that we could do to protect this. But our researchers said this is so systemic with these voting systems that you would have to re-engineer the software to really make it right.
Not everyone agrees with the Secretary of State's conclusions.
The Secretary simply lacks the authority to direct the county to use a particular system in the election.
This hearing in a courtroom in Columbus is just one of many skirmishes being fought across the country over whether it's better to use already purchased touch-screen machines or institute some form of paper ballot. Prosecutor David Phillips, a Republican of nearby Union County, challenged Bruner's order in court. He says the electronic machines work fine and that any new system is just a waste of money.
There is no system made that is 100% foolproof, but our experience in Union County has been that the Ivotronic has worked for us, and we have over $500,000 invested in that system. We'd like to keep it.
As far as you're concerned, the machines have worked well in the county. You don't have any problems with them.
That's correct.
And therefore, you don't see a necessity of having the option of a paper ballot at the precinct. You can do it an absentee ballot.
That's right. And we think that that will create confusion, at least for a difficulty with our poll workers, confusion for the voters, and we don't, we foresee it as essentially producing a more chaotic situation at the polls.
As we traveled across the country, we heard from many voters who
are once again footing the bill. For this report tonight, we come to you from the Franklin County Courthouse in Columbus, Ohio, the site of yet another chapter in this saga over how we vote.
We would never settle for this kind of substandard engineering in our banking or our communication. There would be lawsuits, there would be outcry. So why is it when it's the voters who are the ones at risk, that they get the short shrift and we should just be required to accept it.
Ohio Secretary of State Jennifer Brunner has a very big mess to clean up and not a lot of time to do it. Brunner, a Democrat, took office in 2007 and now is overseeing a critical election season. Few thought Ohio would play such a large role in the primaries, but its March 4th contest now makes it one of a few remaining states that could decide the Democratic nominee and ultimately who sits in the Oval Office. Ohio also is a state that has been plagued with Election Day problems. In 2004, there were long lines at the polls, allegations of vote fraud, and the state's touchscreen machines have routinely malfunctioned. In a survey last year, Ohio voters, like a growing number of voters and public officials across the country, said they had serious doubts about touchscreen voting machines. And so did Secretary of State Brunner.
We did a top-to-bottom review of the voting machines that we use and the systems we use here in Ohio.
In September, she commissioned nearly $2 million in tests of the state's electronic voting machines. The results, published in the so-called Everest Report, were disturbing. The study found insufficient security, lack of accountability, and flawed software.
So essentially, we have over $100 million worth of voting machines that we bought in Ohio, and these are where we found some of the greatest cause for concern.
The study, conducted by an independent lab in Denver and researchers from 4 universities conducting parallel tests, found the machines vulnerable to tampering and potentially crippling technical glitches.
Essentially, with some of the models, depending on which you're talking about, one, the memory cards that actually hold the data for people's votes, there's no buffer on those, so that essentially, if the memory card is full, the information at the beginning is erased and you don't get any kind of notification that you're losing data on the cards.
Just weeks before the March 4th primary, Brunner ordered all Ohio counties using the electronic voting machines to also offer paper ballots, ballots that will be counted using optical scan machines like this.
We don't want to create confusion, we don't want to create chaos, so we're listening to everyone, and if our goal is to improve voter confidence, if we can reach some kind of resolution in a bipartisan fashion, we will improve voter confidence because it wasn't one party pulling something over on another.
But Brunner has a more ambitious agenda. Replace all of the state's electronic touchscreen voting machines with what she says are the more reliable optical scan machines in time for November's general election. Back in August, we reported our own investigation of the Ivotronic machines made by Election Systems and Software, ES&S, and we found performance